Welcome, seekers of truth of the self. In this enlightening exploration, we'll delve into the heart of the Bhagavad Gita, addressing prevalent misconceptions that have obscured its true essence. In Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, verses 22 to 24, Lord Krishna is discussing the nature of the self, referred to as the Jivatma, or embodied soul. These verses convey the idea that the self is eternal, indestructible, and beyond the material body and mind. In verse 24, it is emphasized that the self is omnipresent, suggesting that it exists everywhere. In the previous video, we explored the idea based on our observation and experience that we are not our bodies. Additionally, in the Law of Automation series, we discussed how the mind operates beyond our control, implying that we are not our minds either. At this point, we recognize ourselves as the observer who perceives through the five senses and observes mental activities such as thoughts, imagination, and dreams. Now, let's delve into what the Bhagavad Gita says about the observer and how it defines our existence. Reflect on these three verses. Can you grasp the concept of your true self as the observer, omnipresent, and existing everywhere? If you suggest that in verses 23 and 24, Sri Krishna is referring to the Atma, or soul, while in verse 22, he is discussing the Jivatma, or embodied soul, and both are distinct concepts. Embodied soul tends towards rebirth, while Atma or soul is everywhere, infinite. Jivatma or embodied soul is a part of Atma or soul, which is us. Consider this analogy. Sam is changing his haircut from spikes to buzz. Now, if someone says, "For this boy is incapable of being consistent to manage his hairs," are they talking about a different person or the same person, Sam? The answer is obvious. It's the same person referred to in both statements. Similarly, when examining verses 22, 23, and 24 in the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna consistently talks about the Jivatma, the embodied soul. In verse 24, the use of the phrase "for this soul" reinforces the continuity of the discussion about the same embodied soul. I've utilized metaphors such as light, space, and electricity to provide a deeper understanding of this concept. It's important not to interpret these comparisons too literally. Consider them as examples that serve as useful analogies for comprehending the nature of the self. Let's understand this from our own experiences. We've established that we are beyond the mind and body, and the observer within your body is the same as the observer within my body. There's no discernible difference, much like the oneness of atoms in our bodies. The mind acts based on desires shaped by society, leading to diversity in actions. However, the observer, our true essence, remains the same. As I explain more fully and in depth in my Law of Automation playlist, it's comparable to electricity in two different bulbs or fans. They function differently due to their composition, but the electricity itself is the same. This illustrates the concept that although the instruments, mind and body, may act differently due to their compositions, the observer or self remains the same. We can understand the omnipresence of the observer by considering the analogy of light. The observer is akin to the light. Do you know the nature of light? We don't see light itself. Rather, we see its reflection. If there's light, but no object to reflect it, we perceive darkness. Think of the moon, where the lack of atmosphere and objects leads to a dark sky despite the sunlight. Similarly, without a body to reflect it, the observer might seem elusive. Before reflection, there is an underlying light that remains unseen in the absence of an object to reflect it. Similarly, consciousness, the observer or the self is everywhere, but it becomes detectable through the body, just as an object is needed for the reflection of light. This is why we often perceive the observer to be only within the bodies, similar to how we associate light with the presence of an object. Without the object, we cannot detect light, and without a body, we cannot perceive the observer. The observer exists everywhere, even without bodies, much like light exists without any object. If there's no observer everywhere, then who is observing through bodies? It's akin to asking if there's no light, how can it reflect from an object? Consider this. Is the light that is not reflected any different from the light that is reflected? No, it's the same light, isn't it? Likewise, when we delve into the concepts of soul and embodied soul, Atma and Jivatma, some may think they are distinct. However, upon closer examination, it becomes clear that the Jivatma, or the embodied soul, is described as being everywhere. This implies that the soul, Atma, and the embodied soul, Jivatma, are in fact one and the same. Just as the space within your body is the same to the space within my body, or the space outside the body spread throughout the entire universe. Now, if I use words like self, soul, Atma, embodied soul, Jivatma, consciousness, observer, these are just different names for the self that observes through bodies. Then what is the meaning of verse 22 if the observer is everywhere? How do we interpret the idea of traveling of the observer from one body to another as mentioned in this verse? In the next video, we will delve deep into the concept of rebirth mentioned in verse 22, exploring its profound meaning. Brace yourself for a revelation that will challenge your understanding and leave you with a mind-bending perspective. Stay tuned